The tension in the main conference room of St. John's Hospital was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. It was Monday morning, 9 a.m. For 5 long years, I had poured my life into this orthopedic department. I arrived before dawn, left way past midnight, and personally handled the most dangerous spinal surgeries that other surgeons refused to touch. My SCI publication count was higher than the rest of the department combined, and my surgical success rate stood at an absolute, unblemished 100%. Every single doctor in the room knew why we were gathered today. Dr. Evans, the old department head, had retired last month. Today, the new chief of orthopedics would be officially announced. My colleagues smiled and nodded as they took their seats around the long mahogany table. "Early congratulations, Charles," whispered Dr. Miller, leaning over from the chair beside me. "You've earned this 10 times over. Drinks are on you tonight." "Thanks, Miller," I replied with a subtle, polite smile, adjusting the lapels of my crisp white coat. "Let's wait until it's official." In truth, I wasn't just doing this for career progression. For 5 years, I had deliberately suppressed my true background. The world knew me as Charles Foster, a hardworking, unassuming, soft-spoken senior surgeon. Nobody in this hospital, not even my wife, Victoria, who served as the director of hospital operations, knew that Foster was not just a common last name. I was the sole heir to the Foster Group, a global medical and financial conglomerate worth hundreds of billions of dollars. I had chosen to start from the absolute bottom, wanting to prove my worth through pure clinical skill rather than my family's staggering wealth. The conference room doors swung open, and Victoria stepped inside, looking immaculately polished in a tailored Chanel tweed suit, holding a leather folder. Beside her walked Ethan Vance, a young doctor who had joined the department less than 6 months ago. Ethan strutted in with his chin held high, wearing an arrogant, triumphant smirk. He was Victoria's junior from university, her self-proclaimed protege, and everyone knew they shared a suspiciously close relationship behind closed doors. Victoria constantly showered him with prime surgical opportunities while ignoring my years of sacrifice. Victoria took her place at the head of the table. Her sharp eyes swept across the room, brushing past me with utter coldness before resting fondly on Ethan. "Good morning, everyone," Victoria began, her tone authoritative and unyielding. "Today marks a pivotal transition for St. John's Orthopedic Department. After thorough consideration by the executive board, we have selected our new chief of orthopedics." She paused, deliberately building the suspense. I sat up straight, calm and composed, ready for the moment I had rightfully earned. "Please join me in congratulating our new department chief, Dr. Ethan Vance," Victoria announced, clapping her hands. A suffocating silence instantly descended upon the room. The smiles on my colleagues' faces froze. Dozens of eyes flicked rapidly between me, Ethan, and Victoria. Shock, confusion, and awkward pity filled the air. Ethan wasn't even qualified to perform a complex lumbar discectomy without supervision, yet he was just handed the highest medical authority in the building. Ethan stood up, puffing out his chest, and bowed dramatically to the room. "Thank you, Director. Thank you, board members. I promise to bring fresh, modern vitality to this department and lead us to a bright future." I sat completely still. I didn't blink. My eyes locked onto Victoria, searching her face for a single shred of shame or explanation. There was none. She looked at me with a mixture of cold disdain and warning, as if telling me not to dare make a scene. Meeting adjourned, Victoria said crisply, "Ethan, my office. Charles, step inside as well." 5 minutes later, I stood inside the director's office. Ethan was leaning casually against Victoria's massive oak desk, sipping an espresso with an insufferable grin. Victoria sat in her executive chair, crossing her legs. "Why, Victoria?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Ethan has been here for 6 months. He lacks basic surgical experience. I have spent 5 years building this department's reputation." Victoria sneered, tossing a paper document onto the desk in front of me. "Experience? Charles, don't be so naive. Ethan brings energy, charisma, and elite social connections. You're just a quiet brute who knows how to hold a scalpel. You have zero management skills, zero vision, and zero background." Ethan took a slow sip of his coffee and chuckled softly. "Come on, Charles. Don't be bitter. Someone with your background, or lack thereof, should be grateful just to have a stable job here." Victoria gave you a roof over your head and a status as the director's husband. Don't push your luck. Shut up, Ethan, I said, barely raising my voice. Yet the sheer coldness in my tone made Ethan flinch slightly. Victoria slammed her palm onto the desk. Watch your tongue, Charles. Ethan is your superior now. I called you in here to sign this internal transfer and waiver agreement. You will stay on as senior attending, support Ethan's leadership, and handle his administrative overflow. Sign it. I looked down at the document. It was a complete humiliation clause, forcing me to surrender all my research patents to Ethan and act as his ghost surgeon while taking none of the credit. She gave you everything, Charles, Ethan mocked, stepping closer to me. Without Victoria, you're nothing but a nameless nobody in a white coat. Know your place. I looked at Ethan, then at Victoria. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of hiding my true self to support her career, giving her subtle financial backing through secret third-party investments, allowing her to take all the glory while I worked in the shadows. She truly believed I was a weak, powerless puppy who would never leave her side. She thought she owned me. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I reached into my inner coat pocket, pulled out a Mont-Blanc pen, and pulled a folded sheet of paper from my pocket alongside a pre-signed document. I laid them both quietly on her desk. What is this? Victoria frowned. The top page is my official resignation, effective immediately, I said smoothly. The bottom page is a signed divorce agreement. I am relinquishing all rights to our shared marital properties. You can keep the house, the cars, and your precious hospital. Victoria froze. A flash of genuine panic crossed her eyes before quickly being replaced by anger. Are you out of your mind, Charles? You're quitting? Over a title? Do you think you can survive out there without my influence? Without St. John's Hospital, no medical institution in this city will ever hire you. You really think I'll starve without you, Victoria? I asked quietly, looking straight into her eyes. Yes, Victoria barked, standing up. You have no family, no capital, and no connections. You are nothing. If you walk out that door today, don't you dare come crawling back on your knees begging for my forgiveness. Ethan smirked, crossing his arms. Let him go, Victoria. He's just throwing a temper tantrum. Let's see how many days he lasts before he comes back begging to sweep the operating rooms. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I slowly unbuttoned my white lab coat, took off my hospital badge, and tossed them casually onto Victoria's executive desk. You're right about one thing, Victoria, I said, turning my back to them and walking toward the door. Today is indeed a turning point, but not for your department. I stopped at the threshold, glancing over my shoulder with a gaze so piercing that both Victoria and Ethan unconsciously stepped back. You spent 5 years assuming I was just a nobody at your feet, I whispered coldly. You really believe that if I left you, I'd have nothing. Soon, Victoria, you will realize that what you just threw away was the entire world. Without waiting for her response, I pulled open the door and walked out. I walked straight through the hospital lobby, ignoring the whispers and stares of the staff. As I stepped through the main glass doors into the crisp morning air, a fleet of 6 sleek, pitch-black Rolls-Royce Phantoms glided silently into the hospital's VIP driveway. The lead car's door opened, and an elderly man in an impeccable tailored suit and white gloves stepped out, followed by 8 imposing bodyguards in tactical suits. It was Harrison, the chief butler of the Foster family. In front of hundreds of shocked doctors, nurses, and patients standing at the hospital entrance, Harrison walked swiftly up to me, stopped 3 paces away, and bowed deeply at 90 degrees. Welcome back, young Master Charles, Harrison said in a loud, respectful, and crystal-clear voice that echoed across the entire courtyard. The chairman has finalized the global restructuring. The Foster Group and all its medical subsidiaries are now officially under your absolute command. I took a deep breath, feeling the heavy chains of 5 years of restraint finally shattering into pieces. Get the car ready, Harrison, I said calmly, stepping into the back seat of the custom Rolls-Royce. And keep an eye on St. John's Hospital. Tomorrow, Ethan Vance is scheduled to perform a complex spinal fusion on Duke Sterling's father. Harrison smirked respectfully as he closed the heavy armored door for me. Understood, sir. Shall we prepare the takeover paperwork for St. John's as well? Not yet, I murmured, leaning back against the leather seat as the luxury fleet accelerated smoothly into the traffic. Let Ethan play doctor first. When he ruins that spine tomorrow, Victoria will realize what kind of monster she just unleashed. It was 2 p.m. the next day. I was sitting in the private terrace of my penthouse at the Foster estate, enjoying an espresso while reviewing the quarterly financial statements of our medical tech divisions. My private phone, the one with the secure satellite line, vibrated on the glass table. It was Harrison. Young Master Charles. Harrison's voice came through the speaker, crisp and precise. Dr. Ethan Vance entered operating room 1 at St. John's Hospital 30 minutes ago. He is performing a lumbar L4, L5 fusion on Lord Edward Sterling, Duke Sterling's father. I took a slow sip of my coffee. How is the atmosphere? Chaos in the making, sir, Harrison replied with a faint trace of amusement. Ethan insisted on proceeding without senior supervision to prove his new authority as department chief. Director Victoria Sterling, formerly Victoria, is watching from the observation gallery alongside Duke Sterling himself. Ethan's spatial orientation is garbage, I said calmly, looking out over the city skyline. Under pressure, he loses his depth perception. Keep me updated. Understood, sir. I put the phone down and went back to my reports. I didn't need to be in that operating room to know what was happening. Ethan had spent his short career taking credit for routine procedures while pushing complex cases onto me. AL4, L5 fusion on a 70-year-old patient with severe osteoporosis wasn't something you could fake with charisma or political maneuvering. Meanwhile, inside operating room 1 at St. John's Hospital, the air was suffocatingly tense. Ethan stood at the primary surgeon's position, sweat dripping down his forehead beneath his surgical cap. The monitor displayed the patient's fluctuating vital signs. Dr. Vance, the bone density is extremely low, the scrub nurse warned nervously, handing him the pedicle screwdriver. The C-arm fluoroscopy alignment looks slightly off. Should we readjust the angle before insertion? I know what I'm doing. Ethan snapped, his voice sharp and cracking with hidden anxiety. Up in the observation gallery, Duke Sterling was watching his every move through the glass window. Victoria was standing right next to the Duke, smiling proudly. Ethan couldn't afford to hesitate. Hand me the 6.5mm pedicle screw, Ethan demanded, gripping the instrument tightly. I don't need another x-ray. I've done this 100 times. He positioned the tip at the L5 pedicle entry point, but his hands were trembling. The angle was 3 degrees too medial, pointing directly toward the spinal canal and the anterior iliac vessels. Dr. Vance, wait, the assistant surgeon started to say. Crack. Ethan applied brute force, driving the heavy steel screw forward. Instead of sliding smoothly down the narrow bony canal of the pedicle, the screw breached the inner cortical wall with a sickening crunch. Beep, 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 beep. The anesthesia monitor exploded into a frenzied storm of alarms. BP is dropping rapidly, 80/45 and plunging. The anesthesiologist screamed, bolting upright from his chair. We have massive internal bleeding. The nerve root is severely compressed, and he's losing arterial pressure. Ethan froze. The surgical field instantly filled with dark, pulsing arterial blood, obscuring the entire anatomical site. What happened? Ethan stammered, his face draining of all color as his hands shook uncontrollably. I followed the landmark. Why is there so much blood? You hit the segmental artery and breached the canal. The assistant surgeon yelled in pure panic, grabbing suction devices to clear the pool of blood. The screw is displaced into the spinal canal. He's going to paralyze him, or kill him on this table in 5 minutes. Fix it. Suction. More sponges. Ethan shrieked, blindly shoving a pair of forceps into the bleeding wound, only to tear the delicate neurological tissue further. Up in the observation gallery, Duke Sterling's eyes went wide with fury. He slammed his fist against the glass window, shattering the silence. What is he doing to my father? The Duke roared, grabbing Victoria by the collar of her suit jacket. You guaranteed me this man was the top spine specialist in the country. If my father dies on that table, I will burn this hospital to the ground and put every single one of you in prison. Victoria went pale. She looked down into the operating theater and saw Ethan standing like a paralyzed statue while blood overflowed the sterile drapes. Ethan, what's going on? Victoria screamed through the intercom system. Victoria. I don't know. Ethan cried out, weeping through his surgical mask. The anatomy was abnormal. It's not my fault. I can't stop the bleeding. I don't know how to repair a medial breach. Who can fix this? Duke Sterling shoved Victoria against the wall, his bodyguards instantly pulling their sidearms in the gallery. Get someone in there now. Victoria's mind went blank for a fraction of a second. Then, a single face flashed through her memory. A man who had performed over 2,000 complex spinal operations without a single complication. A man who could locate a pedicle blindfolded. Charles. Victoria pulled out her iPhone with trembling hands and dialed my number. Back at the Foster estate, my personal phone began to ring. I glanced at the screen. Victoria. I didn't pick up. I casually pressed the volume button to mute the ringtone, flipped the phone face down, and took another sip of coffee. 10 seconds later, it rang again. Then again, and again. By the 15th call, a flood of text messages began pouring in. Charles, pick up the phone. It's an absolute emergency. Charles, please. Lord Sterling is dying on the table. Ethan made a mistake. Only you can save him. Where are you? I know you're angry about yesterday, but this is a human life. Answer me. I'm begging you, Charles. Pick up. I'll give you the chief position. Just answer. The phone screen lit up continuously. 20 missed calls. 28 missed calls. 35 missed calls. 40 missed calls. I picked up the phone, unlocked the screen, and casually selected Victoria's contact profile. I tapped block this caller, followed by delete contact. Just then, my butler Harrison walked onto the terrace, holding a silver tablet. Young master, Harrison said respectfully. Director Victoria has attempted to reach you 40 times. She has also ordered the hospital staff to call every clinic and emergency room in the state trying to locate your whereabouts. Let her call, I said impassively. She made her choice yesterday. She said I was a nobody who couldn't survive without her. Let her top doctor handle her mess. The situation in or one has completely collapsed, Harrison reported. Lord Sterling's blood pressure is critical. Duke Sterling has placed the entire hospital under armed lockdown. Nobody is allowed to leave. Has Ethan confessed yet? He is currently crying on the operating room floor. Sir, Harrison replied smoothly. And Victoria is currently frantically driving toward our old apartment, hoping to drag you to the hospital by force. I let out a soft, cold laugh. She really thinks I still live in that modest 2-bedroom apartment I bought to keep up appearances? Shall I have security escort her off the premises if she wanders near the estate? Harrison asked. No, I replied, standing up and buttoning my dark tailored suit jacket. Let her go to the apartment. Let her realize how little she actually knew about the man she was married to for 5 years. My satellite phone chimed. It was an encrypted line reserved exclusively for global heads of state and top-tier nobility. I answered it. This is Dr. Foster. Dr. Foster. Thank God. Duke Sterling's desperate, booming voice came through the line. I got this private emergency satellite clearance from the International Medical Council. My father is dying at St. John's Hospital. The incompetent fools here butchered his spine. Name your price. 10 million, 50 million, a royal title. I need you in this operating room right now. I walked over to the edge of the terrace, looking down at the helicopter landing pad on my estate, where a sleek black Sikorsky S-76 was already idling its rotors. Duke Sterling, I said in a calm, commanding tone. I am aware of your father's condition, but I am no longer a doctor at St. John's Hospital. I was forced to resign yesterday by Director Victoria. What? Duke Sterling gasped in utter disbelief. That arrogant bitch told me you were on administrative leave. She forced out the greatest spine surgeon in the world for that worthless fraud. If you want me to save your father, I said coldly, you have 3 minutes to clear out the incompetent trash in that room and prepare the highest tier emergency surgical authorization under my personal name. Not St. John's. Consider it done. Duke Sterling roared over the line. My private military helicopter is already en route to pick you up. No need. I interrupted, walking toward my helipad as the rotor blades whipped my coat. My private aircraft will be on your roof in 4 minutes. Tell Victoria to wait at the entrance. I want her to see exactly who comes out of that sky. The heavy chop of the twin turbine engines roared over St. John's Hospital as my private Sikorsky S-76 descended onto the rooftop helipad. Below on the tarmac, Duke Sterling stood surrounded by dozens of armed private security officers. Victoria was standing a few feet behind him, her hair disheveled, her expensive makeup ruined by tears and cold sweat. Beside her, Ethan was practically hyperventilating, his surgical scrubs still soaked in blood, looking like a man awaiting his execution. When the helicopter doors slid open, 6 foster group security personnel in crisp black suits stepped out first, clearing a wide path. I stepped down from the cabin, dressed in an immaculate charcoal gray tailored suit, my expression cold and unreadable. Victoria's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. She took an involuntary step forward, her voice cracking. "See, Charles? What? Why are you coming out of that helicopter?" I ignored her completely, walking straight past her toward Duke Sterling. "Dr. Foster." Duke Sterling rushed forward, grabbing my hand with both of his powerful voice trembling. "Thank God you're here. My father's vitals are slipping fast. The internal bleeding hasn't stopped." "I know," I said calmly, pulling a pair of sterile black leather gloves onto my hands. "I have the telemetry live feed from your father's monitors synced to my tablet. He has less than 15 minutes before hypovolemic shock leads to irreversible organ failure." "Charles." Victoria scrambled over, grabbing at my sleeve. Her face was flushed with frantic desperation. "Charles, thank God you came back. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. Look, I'm sorry about yesterday, okay? It was all a misunderstanding. Just save Lord Sterling first, and I'll give you back your job. I'll make you chief right now." I stopped in my tracks. I turned my head slowly, looking down at her hand on my arm as if looking at a piece of garbage. "Take your hands off me," I said, my voice dead silent, yet freezing the blood in her veins. "Charles, please," she sobbed, tightening her grip. "Ethan made an honest mistake. We can fix this together. You're my husband." Before she could finish, Harrison stepped forward smoothly, placing a heavy hand on Victoria's shoulder and shoving her backward with firm, unyielding force. "Step back, Director Sterling," Harrison commanded coldly. "You are addressing the global chairman and chief executive of the Foster medical empire. Know your place." Victoria stumbled backward, almost falling over her heels. She stared at Harrison, then at me, her mind completely short-circuiting. "F. Foster Medical Empire?" Ethan stammered, his eyes bulging out of his head. "No, no way. He's just a scholarship student with no background. Victoria told me he was a nobody." "A nobody?" Duke Sterling turned around and slapped Ethan across the face with a thunderous crack. Ethan fell onto the concrete, clutching his bleeding cheek. "You worthless piece of trash," Duke Sterling spat, towering over Ethan with pure malice. "Dr. Charles Foster is the lead medical consultant for the royal family of England and the sole owner of the largest medical tech conglomerate in North America. Your entire hospital's equipment, funding, and licensing exists solely because the Foster Group allowed it." Victoria's knees went weak. She grabbed the metal railing of the helipad to keep herself from collapsing. Her breath caught in her throat as memories of the past 5 years flooded her brain. How Charles always had access to unlimited research funding. How top international specialists always answered his private phone calls instantly. How St. John's received a $50 million anonymous grant the exact month she married him. It was never the hospital supporting Charles. It was Charles single-handedly sustaining her and her hospital from the shadows. "Charles," Victoria whimpered, her voice trembling violently as tears streamed down her cheeks. You own the Foster Group this whole time? Why? Why didn't you tell me?" "Why would I?" I asked, looking down at her with absolute apathy. "So you could use my family's name to elevate frauds like Ethan? You said yesterday that without you and St. John's Hospital, I was nothing. You said no institution in this city would ever hire me. I was wrong. I was blind." Victoria dropped to her knees right there on the hard concrete, reaching out to grab the hem of my trousers. "Charles, I'm sorry. I was stupid. Please, save the hospital. Save me. If Lord Sterling dies here, Duke Sterling will ruin me. Your survival is not my concern." "Victoria," I said coldly, stepping back so her hand hit empty air. "I am going into that operating room for Lord Sterling, because a patient should not pay with his life for your arrogance and infidelity." I turned to Duke Sterling. "Prepare the ore. No one enters except my personal surgical team." "Wait." Ethan scrambled up from the floor on his hands and knees, desperately crying out to me. "Dr. Foster. Charles, take me in with you. Let me assist you. If I'm not involved in the revision surgery, my medical license will be revoked forever." I'll be ruined. I paused at the double doors leading to the emergency elevator. I looked back at Ethan, who was weeping like a terrified child. Your license? I let out a soft, cold laugh. Ethan, when I step out of that operating room, losing your license will be the least of your worries. Duke Sterling's legal team will ensure you spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary for criminal negligence. No, no, Ethan shrieked, clutching his head in utter despair. And as for you, Victoria, I added, glancing at her pale, shivering figure kneeling on the ground. Enjoy your final hours as director of St. John's. Because by sunset today, this hospital changes hands. I swiped my personal master keycard across the elevator reader, the doors sliding open smoothly. My surgical team stepped in behind me as I pulled on my surgical mask. The lift doors closed, leaving Victoria and Ethan trapped on the rooftop in a storm of utter panic, despair, and crushing regret. The doors to operating room 1 hissed open. The floor was a disaster. Pools of dark blood covered the linoleum, and blood-soaked sponges sat piled in metal trays. The local surgical team stood frozen near the wall, completely out of their depth. Clear the room, I commanded sharply, stepping to the scrub sink. My team takes over primary, scrub, and assistant positions. Local anesthesiologist stays, but follow my lead. Within 90 seconds, I was fully scrubbed, gloved, and standing at the head of the operating table. The monitors were chiming in rapid, panicky intervals. Blood pressure, 72/40. Heart rate, 135 BPM. Hand me the suction and the intraoperative cell saver, I said, holding out my palm. Nurse, prepare 2 units of packed red blood cells on rapid infusion. Yes, Dr. Foster. The local nurse blurted out, her hands shaking as she handed me the instruments. In the observation gallery above, Duke Sterling, Victoria, and Ethan watched through the glass window. Victoria pressed her hands against the glass, her heart hammering against her ribs. I looked into the exposed surgical site. Ethan's work was atrocious. The L5 pedicle screw was completely misdirected, jammed sideways into the spinal canal. It had sheared through the internal vertebral venous plexus and was resting less than a millimeter from the anterior iliac artery. He didn't just breach the pedicle, my assistant surgeon, Dr. Miller, muttered in horror from across the table. He literally drove it blind into the canal. It's a miracle the patient hasn't bled out on the table. Hold suction right here, I instructed calmly. Keep the field clear. I'm going to back the screw out while simultaneously placing a vascular clip on the ruptured segment. Backing it out now could trigger a massive arterial hemorrhage if the tip compromised the vessel wall. The local anesthesiologist warned, his voice cracking. Dr. Foster, his pressure can't take another drop. Then watch his pressure, because I'm not asking for your permission, I replied without looking up. Hemostat. I gripped the screwdriver with absolute precision. My fingers were rock steady. I turned the driver counterclockwise by a quarter turn. Blood surged upward, but before it could swamp the cavity, my left hand moved like lightning, slipping a microvascular clip through the pooling blood and clamping the severed vessel precisely at the bleed site. The rushing sound of blood stopped instantly. The suction canister went quiet. The anesthesiologist gasped, staring at the monitor in utter disbelief. BP. BP is stabilizing. 90/60. 110/70. Bleeding stopped. Up in the gallery, Duke Sterling let out a massive breath he had been holding, collapsing into a chair with tears of relief in his eyes. Victoria slumped against the wall, her face pale. Ethan, standing beside her, looked like he had just seen a ghost. Now, let's fix the spine, I said smoothly. Hand me the bone wax and the 5.5mm titanium revision rod. Over the next 40 minutes, my hands moved with surgical perfection. I cleared the bone fragments, repaired the damaged dura mater with microsutures, and placed a new, perfectly angled titanium screw straight down the center of the L5 pedicle. Final fluoroscopy check, I called out. The X-ray technician slid the C-arm into position and took the shot. The image appeared on the overhead monitors. The hardware sat in textbook, absolute perfection, fully bypassing the nerve root with millimeter precision. Suture, I said, dropping my instruments onto the tray. Close them up. Surgery complete. A wave of spontaneous applause broke out among the nurses and techs in the room. I stripped off my bloody gloves, tossed them into the biohazard bin, and walked straight out of the suite. When I stepped into the VIP waiting corridor, Duke Sterling rushed forward and grabbed my hand, shaking it violently. "Dr. Foster, words cannot express my gratitude," Duke Sterling said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my father's life. You are an absolute miracle worker." "He will recover fully," I said, stepping back politely. "He'll be up and walking in 3 days with physical therapy." At that moment, Victoria and Ethan hurried down the hallway toward us. Victoria tried to force a warm, relieved smile, while Ethan hung back, looking terrified. "Charles," Victoria called out, her voice trembling with forced optimism. "Thank God. I knew you could do it. You saved Lord Sterling, and you saved St. John's. I'm going to call an immediate press conference to announce the successful operation." "Announce what, Victoria?" I asked, looking at her with cold contempt. "Announce that your chief of orthopedics almost murdered a patient on the table, and your ex-husband had to come in as a private consultant to fix his amateur mess?" Victoria's smile instantly vanished. "Charles, please, we can handle this internally. Ethan made a mistake, but we can frame this as a collaborative effort between our top surgeons." "Collaborative effort?" Duke Sterling barked, wheeling around to face her. "Are you insane, woman? That pathetic coward nearly killed my father. He didn't even know where the artery was." Ethan stepped forward, wringing his hands, trying to whine his way out. "Duke Sterling, please understand. The anatomy was abnormal. Dr. Foster only succeeded because I had already exposed the field for him. I did the heavy lifting." Slap. I didn't even let him finish his sentence. My right hand whipped across Ethan's face with enough force to send him crashing sideways against the hard wall. He slid down to the floor, clutching his jaw, sobbing in pain. "Keep my name out of your pathetic excuses," I said, stepping over him and towering above his trembling body. "You didn't expose the field, Ethan. You butchered a human being because you were too arrogant to admit you lacked the skills. You are a disgrace to the white coat." "Charles," Victoria shrieked, trying to pull me back. "You can't just hit my chief of department in front of everyone. He is not chief of anything." I turned to Victoria, my eyes burning into hers. "And as of right now, neither are you." Victoria blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about?" Before she could comprehend my words, Harrison walked down the hallway accompanied by 4 men in tailored charcoal suits, holding thick leather legal briefcases. "Young Master Charles," Harrison reported respectfully, handing me a signed document. "The emergency acquisition is complete. The Foster Group has just purchased 65% of the voting shares of St. John's Medical Health System from the primary board members." I took the document and tossed it straight at Victoria's chest. The papers scattered across the floor. "Read it, Victoria," I said coldly. "As majority shareholder, my first executive act is the immediate termination of Director Victoria Sterling and the instant revocation of Ethan Vance's medical credentials at every affiliated facility nationwide." Victoria dropped to her knees, scrambling to pick up the papers. Her eyes scanned the legal seals and signatures in horror. "No, no, Charles, you can't do this," she sobbed, looking up at me with absolute despair. "I built my entire life around this hospital. You can't take this away from me." "I didn't take it away from you, Victoria," I said, taking Sophia's coat from Harrison as my team prepared to leave. "You threw it away the moment you decided to trade 5 years of my loyalty for a fraud." I turned my back on her and walked toward the exit, Duke Sterling walking alongside me. Behind us, Victoria's hysterical weeping echoed down the long, cold hospital corridor. At 8 a.m. the following morning, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom of St. John's Hospital was ice cold. Victoria sat at the head of the conference table, her eyes bloodshot and dark circles heavily framed under her tired eyes. Beside her, Ethan was fidgeting nervously, clutching a bag of ice against his bruised, swollen jaw. The hospital's board of directors filled the remaining seats. Tension hummed through the air. Victoria cleared her throat, trying to sound authoritative. "Thank you all for attending this emergency meeting. I know yesterday's surgical complication caused some unrest, but I assure you, Dr. Vance and I have the situation under complete control. We are here today to discuss our PR strategy." Bang! The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung wide open. Harrison stepped inside first, followed by 4 corporate attorneys carrying black leather briefcases. Behind them came Sophia Vance, the heiress to Vance Financial Group and global chief legal counsel for the Foster Group, dressed in an immaculate white designer suit. And walking right beside her was me. I walked into the room, my hands casually tucked into the pockets of my navy-tailored suit, taking a position right at the opposite end of the table. Victoria slammed her hands onto the table, springing to her feet. "Charles, what are you doing here? This is a private board meeting. Security, throw them out." None of the security guards moved. They stood outside the door, rigid as statues. "Save your breath." "Victoria," Sophia said smoothly, pulling a thin tablet from her briefcase and sliding it across the polished table. "As of 6 a.m. today, the Foster Group holds 65% of voting equity in St. John's Health System. Dr. Charles Foster is now your supreme chairman. You no longer have the authority to call a meeting, let alone call security." The board members immediately stood up, bowing respectfully toward me. Chairman Foster, the senior board member, Mr. Davis, said hastily, "We have already reviewed the audit reports you sent over last night. We are ready to execute any decision you make." Victoria's face turned ghostly white. She looked around the table, staring at the directors who used to cater to her every whim. "Mr. Davis, what is the meaning of this? I am the director of this hospital. You were the director." "Victoria," I corrected her, my tone devoid of any emotion. "Mr. Davis, read the first item on the agenda." Mr. Davis cleared his throat and looked at Victoria with utter coldness. "By unanimous vote of the majority shareholder, Victoria Sterling is hereby stripped of all executive powers, terminated from her position as hospital director, and banned from all hospital grounds effective immediately. You can't fire me." Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking hysterical echoes against the glass walls. "I built this hospital's modern reputation. You're doing this out of personal spite, Charles. You're abusing your power because I chose Ethan over you." "Chose me?" Ethan suddenly blurted out, panic completely overtaking his mind. He pulled the ice pack from his face and glared at Victoria with pure hatred. "Don't bring me into your sinking ship. Victoria, you're the one who dragged me into that operating room. You promised me I'd be chief. You told me Charles was a useless nobody who wouldn't dare object." Victoria turned on Ethan, her eyes wild with shock. "Ethan, how dare you say that to me? I gave you everything. I sacrificed my marriage for you." "Sacrificed your marriage?" Ethan scoffed, turning to the board members and yelling desperately. "She forced me to take that surgery. I told her I wasn't ready for a complex fusion, but she wanted to use Lord Sterling's case to boost her own political standing. It's all her fault. You pathetic little coward." Victoria lunged across the table, grabbing Ethan by his collar and slapping him hard across his face. Ethan shrieked, shoving Victoria backward. She stumbled, knocking her leather chair onto the carpet with a loud crash. The room descended into a chaotic, ugly brawl between the two of them, screaming accusations, throwing insults, and exposing every dirty secret they had kept hidden. I sat down in the high-backed executive chair, casually folding my hands. Sophia stood beside me, watching the spectacle with a faint, mocking smile. "Are you two finished?" I asked quietly. My voice wasn't loud, but the sheer weight of it made both of them freeze instantly. Victoria was sitting on the floor, her hair tangled and suit ruined, while Ethan cowered near the corner wall. "Sophia, item number 2, I instructed." Sophia stepped forward, pulling a stack of legal notices from her folder. "Item 2 covers personal asset recovery. Mrs. Sterling, during your 5-year marriage to Dr. Foster, you lived in the oceanfront villa on Crestview Drive, drove a fleet of luxury vehicles, and utilized several high-tier line of credit cards. You believe these were provided by your hospital salary and family connections." Victoria looked up, trembling. They were my personal assets." "Incorrect," Sophia replied coldly. "The villa, the vehicles, and even the land St. John's Hospital sits on were purchased entirely through offshore holding companies owned exclusively by the Foster Family Trust. Dr. Foster merely allowed you usage rights during your marriage." Sophia threw a thick stack of eviction notices and freeze orders onto the table right in front of Victoria. "As of 30 minutes ago," Sophia continued, "all your credit lines have been canceled. Your personal bank accounts have been frozen pending a full forensic audit for corporate embezzlement. And the locks on the Crestview Villa have already been changed." Victoria stared at the documents, her breathing becoming shallow and erratic. No. My house. My money. Charles, you can't do this to me. Where am I supposed to live? That is no longer my concern. Victoria, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. You told me 2 days ago that without you, I was a nameless nobody who had no home, no money, and no future. I am simply returning those exact words back to you. Ethan realized the full magnitude of the destruction and dragged himself toward me on his knees. Dr. Foster. Charles. Please. I was manipulated by her. I'll testify against her in court. Just don't destroy my career. Don't take away my license. I looked down at Ethan, my eyes cold as ice. Harrison, I called out. Yes, young master. Notify the state medical board and the district attorney's office. Hand over all raw video footage of Ethan's surgery yesterday, along with his falsified credential files. Make sure the criminal negligence charges are filed by noon. Consider it done, sir, Harrison replied with a respectful nod. No, Charles. Please. Mercy. Ethan screamed as two heavy-set security guards grabbed him by his arms and dragged him backward out of the boardroom, his fingernails digging uselessly into the carpet. Victoria sat frozen on the floor, surrounded by scattered eviction papers and legal notices. She looked up at me, her tears ruining her pale face, her pride and authority completely shattered into dust. Charles, she whispered, her voice filled with a desperate, crushing realization. You were the one protecting me the whole time. I destroyed everything, didn't I? I walked past her without slowing my pace, stopping briefly at the threshold of the boardroom. You didn't just destroy your career, Victoria, I said quietly, without looking back. You threw away the only man in this world who would have given you the universe. I stepped out into the hallway, leaving Victoria alone in the cold room, weeping uncontrollably as the dark reality of her utter ruin settled over her like a tomb. A relentless summer rain pounded against the glass curtain wall of the Foster Group's headquarters in downtown Manhattan. Down on the street level, Victoria stood outside the main entrance, completely drenched from head to toe. Her once pristine Chanel suit was plastered to her skin, stained with city mud. Her luxury vehicle had been repossessed 3 hours ago. Her credit cards were declined at every hotel, and her phone was dead. She had nowhere left to go. The grand glass doors slid open, and two heavy-set security guards stepped out, crossing their arms to block the lobby. I need to see Charles. Victoria cried out, her voice raw and rasping from hours of weeping. Tell him it's Victoria. Tell him his wife is here. You're not his wife, lady, one guard snapped coldly. We have strict orders from Mr. Foster's executive team. You walk 3 feet closer to these doors, and we arrest you for criminal trespassing. Please, just 5 minutes. Victoria dropped to her knees right there on the wet pavement, slapping her palms against the slick marble tiles. Charles, I know you can hear me. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please give me one more chance. Just then, a sleek, navy blue Maybach pulled up smoothly to the private VIP curbing right beside the entrance. Harrison stepped out with a large black umbrella, opening the rear door. I stepped out of the vehicle, wearing an immaculate 3-piece tailored charcoal suit. Beside me stepped Sophia Vance, looking stunning and effortless in an emerald green silk dress, holding a leather folder of international merger documents. Seeing me, Victoria's eyes lit up with frantic, desperate hope. She scrambled up off her knees, attempting to rush toward me. Charles, she shrieked. Harrison instantly stepped between us, holding out a single gloved hand, blocking her completely. I stopped, turning my head to look at her. There was no anger in my eyes, only a cold, hollow indifference that terrified her far more than rage ever could. Charles, oh God, Charles, Victoria sobbed, reaching out with shaking, mud-stained hands. Look at me. I have nothing left. The bank took the house, my accounts are frozen, and the medical board revoked my license this afternoon. Everyone has abandoned me. You brought every bit of this upon yourself. Victoria, I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the falling rain. I know. I was stupid. I was blinded by Ethan's lies. She wailed, trying to push past Harrison's firm grip. He tricked me, Charles. He made me think you didn't care about my career. But I realized it now. You were the only one who truly loved me. I still love you, Charles. We spent 5 years together. You can't just throw away 5 years of marriage. Sophia let out a soft, amused laugh from behind me. Stepping up to my side, and slipping her arm comfortably through mine. 5 years of marriage? Sophia asked, her voice dripping with sharp, refined sarcasm. Mrs. Sterling, or should I say, Miss Sterling, you spent those 5 years treating Charles like a servant while lavishing a cheap fraud with money and titles. You didn't love Charles. You loved the comfort and protection his silent presence gave you. Victoria glared at Sophia with pure jealousy and malice. Who are you? This is between me and my husband. Stay out of this, you homewrecker. Slap. Sophia didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and delivered a sharp, echoing slap across Victoria's face. Watch your mouth, Sophia said coldly, adjusting her silk cuffs. I am Sophia Vance, Chief Legal Counsel for the Foster Group and Principal Partner of Vance Capital. And as of yesterday, I am Dr. Foster's official fiancé, approved personally by the Foster Family Board. Victoria froze. She clutched her burning cheek, staring at Sophia, then at my arm wrapped in hers. Her heart completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. Fiancé? Victoria whispered, her voice choking on her own tears. No, Charles, you replaced me already? I didn't replace you. Victoria, I said coldly, looking down at her as if she were a total stranger. You erased yourself. You chose Ethan when you handed him my position. You chose Ethan when you signed my transfer papers. You chose Ethan when you threw my resignation in my face. I was wrong. Victoria dropped back to her knees, weeping hysterically into the pouring rain, soaking the pavement with her tears. I'll do anything, Charles. I'll be your maid. I'll clean your office. Just don't leave me like this. Don't ruin me completely. It's too late for tears, Victoria, I said, turning away from her and walking toward the private elevator lobby. Harrison, hand her the final legal notice. Harrison pulled a sealed envelope from his coat and dropped it onto the wet ground in front of Victoria. What is this? She whimpered, picking up the soaked paper with trembling fingers. That is a formal indictment from the state prosecutor's office, Sophia explained over her shoulder with a cold smile. You are being officially charged with corporate tax evasion, medical fraud, and complicity in reckless endangerment regarding Lord Sterling's surgery. Your trial begins next month. Victoria's breath completely hitched in her chest. The paper slipped from her numb fingers, floating away in the puddle of rainwater. No, no, please, she whispered, her eyes blank with absolute despair. I didn't look back again. I walked into the warm, illuminated lobby, the heavy glass doors sliding shut behind us, completely sealing out the sound of Victoria's desperate, frantic screaming in the rain. Inside the glass elevator, Sophia looked up at me, a genuine smile gracing her lips. Was that too harsh, Chairman? No, I replied smoothly, pressing the button for the top-floor penthouse. It was justice. Now, let's discuss the acquisition of the European medical divisions. 6 months later, the Metropolitan Grand Ballroom in New York City was packed with thousands of world leaders, medical titans, and corporate executives. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the room as the annual World Medical Summit reached its climax. On the massive LED screens flanking the main stage, a larger-than-life photo of me stared back at the audience above a bold, shimmering headline. Time Magazine Man of the Year, Dr. Charles Foster, Titan of Global Healthcare. I stood at the center podium, dressed in an immaculate bespoke tuxedo. Beside me stood Sophia, looking radiant in a floor-length dark velvet gown. Tonight, the Foster Group is officially releasing our breakthrough artificial spine regeneration technology to 300 public hospitals worldwide, completely free of charge, I announced into the microphone. The entire auditorium erupted into a thunderous, standing ovation. Billionaires, prime ministers, and renowned surgeons stood up, clapping frantically. Dr. Foster, over here, a reporter called out from the front row. With the Foster Group's market capitalization crossing $1 trillion today, what do you have to say to those who doubted your vision years ago? I smiled slightly, my tone steady and calm. Vision requires seeing through temporary noise. Those who lack vision will inevitably be left behind by history. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, inside the State Women's Correctional Facility, the cold, concrete cafeteria smelled of stale bleach and boiled cabbage. Inmates in faded orange jumpsuits sat at metal tables, eating meager rations. Victoria sat at a far corner table, her hair matted, her face hollow and aged by 10 years. Her hands were raw and calloused from her daily mandatory kitchen detail. Across from her sat Ethan, wearing a beige inmate jumpsuit behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass in the visiting booth. His face was pale, his right eye permanently drooping from an untreated nerve injury he had suffered during his chaotic arrest. Ethan picked up the heavy plastic intercom phone, his voice buzzing through the speaker, bitter and venomous. "Look at you, Victoria," Ethan spat, his eyes filled with absolute resentment. "You look like a skeleton. You promised me a bright future. You told me you'd make me chief of surgery. Now I'm serving 15 years for criminal medical malpractice and fraud." Victoria picked up her receiver with a lifeless, trembling hand. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I ruined my life for you, Ethan. I gave up a man who owned the world for a pathetic, incompetent fraud like you. Your fault." Ethan slammed his fist against the glass, startling the guard behind him. "You're the one who pushed me into that surgery. You're the one who told me Charles was a nobody. If you hadn't been so blind and arrogant, we wouldn't be rotting in prison." "Shut up," Victoria choked out, tears rolling down her dirty cheeks. "Just shut up." Above the cafeteria, a mounting television set switched on for the evening news feed. And in Global Business Tonight, the news anchor's polished voice boomed across the cafeteria ceiling. Dr. Charles Foster and his fiancée, Sophia Vance, have just concluded the World Medical Summit. Duke Sterling personally presented Dr. Foster with the Royal Order of Merit. The screen broadcasted live footage of me accepting the medal, surrounded by international press. Sophia stood by my side, smiling warmly as I kissed her cheek. Every inmate in the cafeteria looked up at the screen. "Damn, that guy is a legend," a female inmate nearby muttered, taking a bite of her bread. "Imagine being the idiot who let a man like that slip away. You'd have to be the stupidest person on earth." Victoria stared up at the screen. The image of my smiling, Victoria's face burned into her eyes like molten iron. She remembered the 5 years Charles had spent cooking dinner for her, waiting up late at night to rub her shoulders after long hospital shifts, quietly fixing her administrative mistakes from behind the scenes, loving her unconditionally while asking for nothing in return. And she had thrown him away for Ethan. A harsh, hysterical laugh escaped Victoria's lips, quickly dissolving into violent, agonizing sobs. She dropped the plastic intercom phone, burying her face in her calloused hands, her body shaking convulsively as she wept on the cold concrete floor. "Charles, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she sobbed into the dark air, her voice drowned out by the noise of the cafeteria. But no one was listening. 300 miles away, under the bright lights of the Manhattan skyline, I turned my back on the cameras, took Sophia's hand, and stepped forward into a world where Victoria Sterling no longer existed.